Enteleshi, verse 1, chapter 33. Everyone indoors. The overhang flooded on the 15th day from above. Nobody had expected that, including Auden, who lived under it for 11 years and whose family had held it for longer than the valley had a name. The river was nowhere near it. The river was 400 meters away and 40 meters below. What happened was that the ridge behind the cave stopped being able to hold any more water, and the sandstone shelf that made the roof began, along a hairline joint that nobody had ever noticed, to leak. Not drip, leak. A sheet of brown water came in along the back wall of the cave, ran the whole width of it, and turned the floor, the dry, sandy, ancestral floor of the overhang, where 3 generations of tyrannosaurs had slept, into a shallow moving stream 4 centimeters deep, and, by the 16th day, 11. Vesa came down to Deep Cut at dusk on the 16th day and stood in the rain outside the fig scrub and said, "May we come in?" Verse. Codex had not, until that moment, understood that the shelter was theirs to grant. There were, at the height of it, 11 creatures at Deep Cut. Inside the hill, in the first and second chambers, 3 bots, 2 compsognathids, and no one else, because no one else could get through the crack. Bittle and Cheer, who had spent 4 months being told firmly that Deep Cut was not theirs, moved in on the 17th day with the air of tenants exercising an option and were not asked to leave. Outside, on the porch, Auden, Vesa and Rook, arranged along 4 meters of dry stone in an order that took 2 days to settle, on the widened shelf that Ingot cut into the bank on the 17th and 18th days, working through the night with a stone hammer and a great deal of swearing in a dead language. Pharaoh at the sheltered end, out of the wind, Shale at the open end, on the grounds that he had plates and did not care. And in the fern-roofed extension that went up on the 19th day, held together with rope that had once been a water pump, 4 ceratopsian yearlings from the long meadow, sent up by Hessa with a young cow and a message. The message, delivered formally and repeated back, was, "The north end of the meadow is under water." These 4 have no mothers this season. The terms say that when you are called, you come, and I am calling. The problems were, without exception, small. They were about where a tail goes. A tyrannosaur asleep on his side occupies 4 meters of length and rather more of tail, and the tail moves in sleep, and the shelf was 2.5 meters wide. Shale's spikes were a hazard to everybody, and Shale knew it and spent 19 days sleeping with his tail pointed out into the rain, which meant it was cold and wet all night, and he did not once complain about it. They were about traffic. Everybody had to go out at some point. The only route from the shelf to the outside world went along the porch, past the sleeping tyrannosaurs, in the dark, which was the single most dangerous walk in Fern Hollow Vale and had to be done by an old iguanodon with a bad hip 4 times a night. They were about the smell. There is no way to write around this. 11 large animals living under a fern roof in continuous rain smell. And after the 11th day, everybody had stopped noticing it except the yearlings, who complained bitterly and were told by Pharaoh that she had smelled worse and had once been the worst thing. They were about noise. Rook snored. It was an enormous, a rhythmic, catastrophic noise that came up through the stone, and on the 4th night Thistle, who had come up with the yearlings for a day and been trapped for 6 by a side channel, said at 2 in the morning, in a voice of pure vibrating hatred, "I will end him," and 11 creatures laughed in the dark. And it was the first time the shelter had all laughed at the same thing. Codex logged that. He logged nearly all of it. It is the most extensive single body of behavioral material in the archive, and he has never once let anybody outside the valley see it. Ingot ran the shelter, and he did it the way he did everything, which was by noticing what was missing. The drip line came first. The porch roof shed water directly onto the strip of ground where everybody had to walk, turning it to grease within a day. So on the 17th, he laid a gutter of split conifer bark and ran it out to the side, which took him 4 hours and stopped 9 falls. Then the second fire on the shelf. The first fire in that valley that anybody but the bots had ever sat beside on purpose. It had to be explained. It had to be explained repeatedly and demonstrated. And there was an entire evening in which 4 ceratopsian yearlings had to be physically prevented from putting their faces in it. And afterwards, Auden lay 4 meters from it for the rest of the season, with his eyes half shut, and never once said a word about the fact that his family had spent 11 generations avoiding exactly this. Then the drying rack. Then the order of the shelf. Who slept where, which was arrived at empirically after 2 bad nights and turned out to be, in Shale's phrase, the old ones in the warm and the young ones, between the old ones and the weather, which is a sentence that ended up carved on a bench at the Ford 6 years later, and which is generally attributed to Hesse, wrongly. And then the latrine order, which nobody wanted to discuss and which Ingot discussed anyway, at length, on the 18th day, in front of everybody, in the flat, unembarrassed voice of a machine explaining a constraint. 11 animals, 1 shelter, standing water everywhere, and the downhill side of the fig scrub is where the seep comes out, and the seep is the only clean water any of us can reach. Pharaoh backed him, which settled it. He's right, and you all know he's right. She said, anybody who goes uphill of that scrub answers to me, and I'm old, so I'll be unpleasant about it. What nobody had a rule for was the thing that mattered. There were 3 animals in that shelter who ate meat, and 6 who did not, and they were living inside 4 meters of each other, in the wet, for 19 days, and every single arrangement in the valley's history had been built on the assumption that this situation would never arise. The first 4 days were fine because everybody was frightened of the weather. By the 6th day, the yearlings had stopped being frightened of the weather and had started being frightened of Auden, which was correct, and which they expressed by huddling, which meant they were always in the way, which meant Auden had to walk round them 11 times a day. By the 9th day, Auden had stopped going out to hunt at first light and had started going out in the dark, and nobody had asked him to. By the 11th, Vessa was eating on the far ledge in the rain, out of sight, alone, 400 meters away, and coming back cold. And when Codex asked her why, she said, because the little one with the pale frill watched me on the 8th day and did not sleep afterwards. And I could hear her not sleeping. You are getting soaked, said Codex. Yes. There is no rule requiring. Zero. There is no rule at all, said Vessa. That is what we are all finding out. Pharaoh said the thing that named it. On the 17th night, propped against the warm end of the shelf, with her bad hip towards the fire and the rain coming down 4 paces away. She said it to nobody in particular, which was how she said most things, and Codex recorded it and has quoted it ever since. Do you know what's happening here? Not the water. This. She moved her head to take in the shelf, the porch, fire. 11 animals in 40 square meters, A brontosaur's flank visible through the rain where moss lay across the bottom of the slope because there was nowhere on Earth big enough to put him. In 91 years, I have never once slept where I could hear somebody else breathing. Not once. Not as a hatchling. My mother was 4 lengths off, and that was close. Every night of my whole life. On my own. And everybody in this valley the same. And we all thought that was just what nights were. You are describing solitude, said Codex. I'm describing safety, said Pharaoh. That's the bit you keep missing. Being on your own is how you don't get eaten. You spread out. You keep quiet. You know where everything else is, and you stay away from it. And that works. It works so well that it's the only thing any of us have ever done. She shifted the hip. And now here's 11 of us in a hole with a fire, because the water came up, and nobody's been eaten, and the little pale one's asleep about 2 lengths from a tyrannosaur. What? There was a silence, in which the rain went on, and something out in the dark made the boom it made every night, regardless of anything. When this stops, said Pharaoh, and it will stop, and everybody will go home. Nobody's going to be able to unknow this. That's all I'm saying. You lot came out of the sky with your fire and your letters on the wall, and you've been very busy. And none of it's going to matter as much as 19 days of everybody finding out they can sleep next to each other. Ah! Enteleki, verse 1, chapter 34. A bad night. He had not eaten properly in 9 days, and nobody had noticed, and that was the whole of it. The arithmetic was simple enough that Codex worked it out afterwards in 4 seconds, and then spent the rest of the night furious with himself for not having worked it out in advance. A tyrannosaur of Rook's age and growth stage needed something in the order of 40 kilos of meat a week. In the dry season, he got it from 3 sources. His father's kills, which were shared on the ledge, his own attempts, which were unsuccessful more often than not, but which were becoming less unsuccessful, and the river, where a young animal could stand in the shallows for an afternoon and get something. In the wet, the river was unusable. His own attempts were impossible. Nothing was moving. And what was moving could not be caught in standing water with no cover. And his father's kills were coming in at half the frequency and being eaten 400 meters away in the dark, out of sight, because of an unwritten rule that had assembled itself over 11 days out of nothing but everybody's care for everybody else. Auden had brought back what he could. He had brought back 2 hindquarters in 11 days, and Rook had eaten most of both. It was not enough. It was about 1/3 of enough. The 11th night was the worst of the whole season for weather. The wind had come round to the north and was driving the rain sideways under the fern roof, so that the sheltered end was the only dry part of the shelf, and everybody had compressed towards it. Pharaoh was at the sheltered end because Pharaoh was 91. The 4 ceratopsian yearlings were next to her because that was the arrangement. The old ones in the warm and the young ones between the old ones and the weather. And the 4 of them had spent the evening being loud in the way that frightened juveniles are loud, and had knocked over the drying rack twice. Rook was at the wet end. He had been at the wet end for 4 nights. Nobody had told him to be. He had gone there himself on the first bad night because he was the largest of the young, and it was the obvious thing, and the arrangement had hardened without anybody discussing it, in the way that arrangements do. At some point after midnight, one of the yearlings, the pale-frilled one, who was 7 and had lost her mother in the spring and had not slept properly in 11 days, got up to move away from a drip and stepped on Pharaoh's bad hip. Pharaoh made a noise. It was not a large noise. It was the short, flat grunt of an old animal who has been hurt and is not going to make a fuss about it. And it was followed immediately by her saying, "It's all right. It's all right. Come on, get under here. You're soaked." It. And Rook, from the wet end of the shelf, in the dark, said, "Can you stop?" Codex has the whole of it. He has been asked twice, by people who had the standing to ask to destroy that recording, and has refused twice, and has never played it to anybody. What is on it is 11 seconds. Rook got up. That was the first thing. The sound of 400 kilos of adolescent tyrannosaur coming off the stone at speed, which in that space was catastrophic on its own. Then his voice, much too loud, cracking on the second word. Every night! Every night! It's the same. It's the shoving and the crying and the Nobody sleeps. Nobody slept in 11 days. And there's nothing to eat. There's nothing. There's been nothing for... Then the yearling screaming. Then the sound of Rook moving up the shelf, which is 4 paces on the recording. Then Pharaoh's voice, entirely level, saying Rook. Then nothing at all for 1.5 seconds. Then Rook going off the end of the porch into the rain and the dark at a run. He did not touch her. He got within about 1.5 meters, which was inside the distance at which a tyrannosaur's decision has already been made. And he stopped, and the reason he stopped is not on the recording and was never established. Pharaoh said afterwards that it was because she used his name. Shale said afterwards that it was because he was 9. Orlan never said anything about it at all. The porch was very quiet after he had gone. "Well," said Pharaoh, "into it. That's been coming." "Oh." "He is not." Codex began. "Don't," said Pharaoh. "Don't do the thing where you explain him. I've been alive 91 years, and I've seen 100 young animals go through the wet hungry, and every single one of them turns into something horrible for a season, and then they stop. That's not the interesting part." She pushed herself up onto her elbows with some difficulty and looked down the porch, past the fire, into the black rectangle of rain at the end of it. "The interesting part is that nobody's going out there." Auden had not moved. He was lying at the far end of the porch with his chin on the stone and his eyes open, and he had been awake for the whole of it. And Codex, who was learning, by then, to read him, could see that he had gone up onto his forelimbs at the 2-second mark and back down again at the 4. "You are not going," said Codex. "Number. Oh! Whoa! Whoa! He is out in that." "Yes." "May I ask why?" "Oh!" Auden was quiet for long enough that Codex assumed the conversation was over, and then he said, "Because if I go out there tonight, then what happened on this shelf was a thing between him and me, and it was not. It was a thing between him and her. He did not lift his head. If I go and get him, he will be angry with me, and he will spend 4 days being angry with me. And at the end of it, he will have decided that he is the sort of animal his father has to come and get. And he will be right. And he will be that animal for the rest of his life. He is 9. Joe. He is 9, and he is 400 kilos. And in 3 years, he will be as heavy as I am," said Auden. "And this valley will contain a full-grown tyrannosaur who has learned that when he goes too far, somebody comes out in the rain for him." He closed his eyes. "I would rather have a son who is cold tonight." Shroom. Vesa did not answer at all when Codex went to her. She was awake. She was lying with her back to the fire, and her head towards the dark, in the direction he had gone, and she stayed in exactly that position for the rest of the night without sleeping. And at first light she got up and went out and hunted for 4 hours in the rain and came back with a young hadrosaur that she had absolutely no business taking on her own, and put it on the ledge and said nothing to anybody about any of it. It was Shale who went out at some point after the middle of the night, and he did it by not making it a thing. He found Rook in the scree above the fig scrub, sitting up, soaked through, with the water running off his jaw, staring at nothing. Shale walked past him. Then he stopped about 4 meters away, facing out at the valley, and stood there for a while. "This slope's going to go," he said. "Nothing. Not tonight. Not this wet, probably. But it's going. Look at it. See where the water's coming off the shelf up there and it's all running to the one place? That's cutting a groove. That's been cutting a groove for about 4 years, and nobody's noticed because nobody stands out here in it." He turned his head. "Your friend down there'd want to know that. He likes a drainage problem." There was a long silence full of rain. "I nearly did it," said Rook. "I know." "I nearly. She's 91. She's... I know," said Shale. "I was there. Everybody was there. There's nowhere in that shelter to not be there." He shifted his weight onto the other side. "Do you want the thing that's true, or do you want the thing that'd make you feel better? Because I've only got one of them, and I'm not much good at the other one." "Ah!" "The true one," said Rook. "You're hungry," said Shale. "That's all it is. It's not a badness in you, and it's not your father, and it's not the little ones, though they are extremely annoying. And I would like that on the record as well. You have not eaten enough for 9 days, and everybody in that shelter has been very carefully being kind to everybody else. And the way they've been doing it is that your mother and your father have been eating 400 paces away in the dark so as not to frighten anybody. And you've been at the wet end pretending you're not starving so as not to make a fuss. And every single one of those is a good thing that somebody did on purpose." He looked back at the porch. "That's the trouble with it. Nobody in this valley has ever had to work out what to do when everyone's being decent and the arithmetic still doesn't come out. Ha! So what do I do?" "Not my business," said Shale. "But if you want a thought, you could try saying it out loud. To all of them. In the light. That's the only bit anybody's actually done wrong tonight. 11 days of nobody saying anything. He waited a while longer, and then went back in, and did not tell anybody where he had been. Rook sat in the rain until the sky went grey. What he decided, sitting there, and he never said it to anybody. And Codex only worked it out 2 years later from the shape of everything that came after, was not what Shale had suggested. It was this. If I never need anything from any of them, this cannot happen again. He got up at first light, went down to the flooded flats on his own without telling a single creature where he was going, and spent 9 hours in water up to his hocks. And at the end of it, he came back up the slope in the last of the light, dragging most of a drowned hadrosaur that he had found jammed in a snag 4 kilometers downstream and had hauled the whole way by himself. He put it on the ledge next to his mother's kill. Then he came down to the shelf, in front of everybody, and stood in front of Pharaoh, with the rain coming off him. "That's for the shelter," he said. "All of it. And I'm sorry?" It was, everyone present agreed, an extraordinary thing for a 9-year-old to have done. It was also, Codex noted in the log that night, in a private file that he did not share with Vane for 2 years. Entirely the wrong lesson. And there is nothing in that valley or any other that can teach a young animal the right one except time. And other people. And eventually a machine made of 5 bodies that does not work at all unless every one of them lets go.